Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm Paula Poindexter, the 2013-2014 president of AEJMC and the chair of the committee that has organized the first ever National News Engagement Day. National News Engagement Day has been one of my most important initiatives as president of AEJMC. I'd like to acknowledge incoming 2014-2015 AEJMC President, Dr. Elizabeth Toth, who has been a big supporter of National News Engagement Day from the very first day I proposed it. I want to thank you for taking time from your very busy schedules to attend our press conference to both release the AEJMC poll on public attitudes toward the press and announce details about the first National News Engagement Day on Tuesday, October 7th. Although some of you may never have heard of AEJMC before, most of you who are in the press have encountered AEJMC because the professors at journalism and communication schools around the country are more often than not members of this association of over 3,700 journalism and communication educators, media professionals, and graduate students. Why National News Engagement Day, and why now? In a minute, I'll show you data that backs up a trend we cannot continue to ignore. We cannot continue to sit on the sidelines and do nothing about the public's declining interest in news. The benchmark I use is a 1964 Journalism Quarterly study, which called newspaper reading one of the most thoroughly institutionalized behaviors of Americans, because 87% of adults read a newspaper daily. Today's news media landscape overflows with unlimited ways to get news 24/7, but news engagement is anything but a thoroughly institutionalized behavior of Americans. And as I see it, we have two choices: continue to ignore the obvious problem, or set aside a day every year to focus on revitalizing the public's engagement with news. Let me show you some of the AEJMC poll data, which reminds us why ignoring the problem is not an option. So this national poll, the public AEJMC poll on public attitudes toward the press, that essentially I want to show you several different parts. One I think that we're kind of familiar with, or we think we have a sense of, it's the public's engagement with news. And when you look at that number, 57% is far lower than the 87% at a time when newspaper reading was considered institutionalized behavior. But under that figure is another figure, 44%, which essentially says that when you ask people about searching for news as opposed to just getting news, because it's really hard to avoid news. I mean, it's around you everywhere, whether you're paying attention to it or not. But that number drops. And so 44% essentially saying, of the public saying that they purposely seek news 7 days per week. And again, keep in mind that benchmark of 87%, which over a half century ago, that's kind of where we were. You pretty much have an idea as to what platforms people are using to engage with news, because you can almost apply your own behavior. But one of the things that's also happening here when you ask the question about where people usually go to get news, that accessing news through TV, top, not surprising, but when you look at a print paper especially, and this is not surprising today, knowing what the news media landscape is today, but at the same time, you can see how much things have changed. Now, this particular question that I love to ask, just as we grade our own students, how well they're doing in their classes and so forth, but I do love to ask about grading the press and its performance. And so essentially there are two grades here. One of the grades has to do just kind of a general grade of the press, and the truth is, press comes out pretty good. However, if our own students, the grades were C and below, then we probably might think that we need to do some work in our own classrooms. But when you look at the question about coverage of most important problem, grading coverage of most important problem, then that particular number is a little bit different. That you see that the press gets a lower grade. More people are giving it a C, D, or F when it comes to coverage of most important problem. Now, most important problem really varies from individual to individual, that we still have to analyze the data very carefully to find out what the most important problem is today, right now. We know that the most important problem right now is kind of changing, but without question that there's been a great concern and people considering most important problem not having jobs and the economy and so forth and so on. Another question that we asked had to do with the public's trust of different sources of news. Now, it is typical in most national surveys. In fact, Gallup just did a survey asking the same questions about public trust of the news. But what this particular survey did was to be very specific and also to bring in social media. And whether we like it or not, the social media is both, part of the news media landscape, and it's a platform that we're all using, but at the same time that when it comes to the younger generation, that sometimes that it's seen that, okay, maybe younger people are going to Twitter, but we don't always know exactly what they're doing when they're going to Twitter for news. But, local TV news in terms of trust, higher than any of the other categories, and I know that will make some here feel very good about that. Local TV news, 42%, local newspaper, 34%, network TV news, 30%. But as you go down the column and to take a look, that the perception of national newspaper, and national newspaper is really kind of in the eyes of the beholder. I might think New York Times and USA Today, someone else might think something else, but we didn't specify what was meant by national newspaper. But still, national newspaper is about a quarter saying that they trust it a lot. What is very interesting that when you compare individual journalists versus this kind of conglomerate of TV news media, national news media, local news media, but when you talk about individual journalists and a perception of trust there, then not so good. 17% saying that they trust journalists a lot when you're talking about individuals as opposed to institutions, news media institutions. The other thing that I think is very interesting, that at least journalists are ahead of Facebook when it comes to trust, and at least journalists are ahead of Twitter when it comes to trust. But still, when compared to the institutions, news organizations as we know them, then of course, they're much further behind. In looking at this, that it occurred to me this morning when I was reviewing this, that Twitter, especially because it is not only used as a source of news, that Twitter is becoming a very important platform in terms of getting news out to the public. Journalists will use Twitter before it's actually posted on the website. So it is something to think about. I don't know what all of this means just yet, but it's something to think about, that if Twitter has such a low sense of trust among the public and it's being relied on as a platform, then it's definitely something to think about. This particular question had a series of questions asking on a scale essentially from 1 to 5, strongly agree to disagree, strongly disagree, but wanted to get a sense of, and I just pulled out the strongly agree because that's the most intense. And I know that there's a lot of information that when I give you the media kit at the end, then it will have all of this data in there for you. But I wanted to pull out the most intense, and essentially that's the strongly agree part, and a couple of things to keep in mind. 45% said, with these statements that were given, to respond to these statements, 45% said that news on the internet should be free. And we know that that's not sustainable for news organizations, but it is something to think about, certainly when the public is saying that, 45%, almost half, saying that it should be free. that there are a few other things. I mean, when it comes to intense feelings about the news, that if I had asked these questions at least a couple of decades ago, I think that these numbers would have been a lot higher, that they really are kind of going down the same way that the level of interest in news has been going down. But a few things just to point out. There was once a sense that the same way that it was important you had a duty to be a good citizen in terms of voting, there was once a sense of duty to be informed, and we would like to think, especially before you go vote, but this sense of duty to be informed, 37%. This question about enjoying keeping up with the news is a question that the Pew asks all the time, and I really like this question because I do think it's a factor when it comes, when you're talking about interest level in news. If you don't enjoy it, then why are you going to do it? And the very fact that only, just slightly more than a third have a strong feeling about enjoying the news, then it is something to be concerned about. A few more things that I want to point out, and you can kind of go through the list, but this sense of, news being biased. Fortunately, only a quarter have strong feelings that the news is biased. So that's a good thing. And it falls into this whole category of perceptions of news. That this whole question about, the sense of news is often inaccurate. Fortunately, only 16% are saying that. But things about depending on news to help with daily life. Well, only 16% strongly agree that they depend on news to help with daily life. And it kind of goes with enjoyment as far as I'm concerned. If it's not important for your daily life or for you to, function in your daily life, then why is it going to be a priority? So I think that these are some things that we certainly should be looking at. And then I guess the one that is certainly something that should get our attention, this whole question of news organizations willing to admit mistakes. And so 10% strongly agree that news organizations are willing to admit mistakes. And when that happens, then you have to, certainly be concerned about that. So essentially, those are some of the, the data. You're going to have all of the data that's shown on the charts, when you get the media kits at the end. But now what I would like to do is to go on and to get some perspectives and insights about National News Engagement Day and the various associations and organizations that are doing things in their organizations, they're talking about it, doing in their associations, and so forth. And to start that, and let me just pull up something. 1 second, I apologize for this. And so I'm going to start and ask Tom Rosenstiel, to say some words. And I want to say this before he gets to talk, because I get to say this since I'm standing up here. I do remember Tom from way back when we were both at the Los Angeles Times, but I'm not saying how long ago that was. But what we're not saying, okay. But what I really want to say is, Tom has done so many amazing things in the field, of journalism, no question about that. But what he has done that is really amazing when it comes to journalism education is to have co-authored a book that I think is probably used in every journalism school around the country. And if it's not used, people know about it. The Elements of Journalism. I rely on it, I use it, I quote from it and so forth, because there's no other way to say it than to have someone to say that these are the things that not only journalists need to pay attention to, but also the public needs to expect from journalists. And I think that oftentimes that we as journalism educators and also journalists need to perhaps go back and buy the most recent copy, the most recent edition, and read it again to remind ourselves what it is that is expected, not only from journalists, but also from the public. And so, Tom?
Thank you, Paula. It's a pleasure to be here, and a pleasure to be able to still remember back when Paula and I were at the LA Times together. You mentioned The Elements of Journalism, which was a book that was first written in 2001 and encapsulated sort of the theory of journalism at the end of the 20th century. We just did a new edition that came out in June and had to evaluate and answer the question that people asked us over and over and over in the last 14 years. Do the principles that underlie journalism in the 20th century still apply at all in the 21st? The answer that Bill Kovach and I came to is that what we expect of journalism fundamentally has not changed. We still need journalism to be accurate. A weather report that's wrong really isn't of much value. We still need journalists who are committed to the citizen first and are not sort of secret agents of political faction. How we fulfill and how we expect journalism to fulfill the concept of accuracy and the other principles of journalism has changed dramatically. The days in which a reporter might be the first person to give an account of what happened is over. Reporters have come up to me and said, somebody just said something that I know is probably false in a press conference or at an event. The event was live webcast, was being live tweeted. I'm going to be midstream in terms of informing the public about this event. How do I deal with accuracy when I'm no longer the initial mediator? What's powerful to me about the concept of this News Engagement Day as an annual event is that we live in a user-controlled media world. Ultimately, what we get from our media is going to be determined by what we as citizens expect of it. The most important thing we can do as journalism educators, as journalists, and as citizens is to influence the demand side. And the most important way of doing that is to make the public, particularly young people, more conscious of the choices that they make as media consumers. If News Engagement Day is a first step in that, it's a very good first step.
Thank you. The next person, Dr. Sonia Duhay, what she's doing to me is just amazing. And it's amazing because she's in New Orleans at Loyola University, and she contacted me because National News Engagement Day was exactly what they had been looking for. And Sonia's going to take us back and remind us when they lost access to the news, and that's why, for her, National News Engagement Day is so important.
Thank you, Paula. In a city where news was a lifeline after Hurricane Katrina, we at Loyola University New Orleans School of Mass Communication truly understand the importance of engaging with the news. That is why we are leading the charge at Loyola to make National News Engagement Day a year-long event. To get things started, New Orleans Mayor Mitch Landrieu and Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal are proclaiming October 7th National News Engagement Day. Then we'll be taking the fun to our campus quad to ask students to get engaged by downloading a local news app, tweet #News Engagement Day, and allow push notifications. In return, students will receive an I'm Engaging button to show others they have engaged with the news. To increase participation, they can also tweet a news story using News Engagement Day and Loyola's own hashtag for the opportunity to win a mini iPad, or what we are calling a news reader. Students in the school's social media class are overseeing the effort, and they have even begun a What's Up Wednesday, where a news story of interest to college students will be placed on all the school's social media platforms. Several New Orleans high schools will be participating in News Engagement Day, and they'll be downloading news apps too. Their newspaper staffs plan to get involved, and they're going to report on the events of the day and encourage students at their local high schools to get engaged with the news. Loyola University's own award-winning newspaper, The Maroon, one of the top 5 student newspapers in the country, will also be promoting the event through their weekly newspaper and their social media platforms. So October 7th, for us, Loyola New Orleans, is a start to what we are planning to make a year-long event with special guest speakers throughout the year coming to our campus. We hope to not only make New Orleans a great city to visit, but a great place to be engaging with the news.
Thank you. You saw the statistics talking about where local TV news and also network TV news, that they're really, at the top of the list. And that's why it's so very important that Karen Hansen is here representing the Radio, Television, Digital News Association. That not only is she representing them, but also because all of the outreach that she does with young people who really represent the future, and those statistics that I talked about, that there's less news involvement with younger adults, that she's trying to do something about that. And so, Karen, why don't you tell us what you all are doing?
Sure, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. RTDNA was formed in 1946 as the National Association of Radio News Editors, and the word television was added in 1952. As recently as 2009, we adopted our current name when we added digital and became the RTDNA. This evolution mirrors the evolution of the industry itself as we followed news consumers to new platforms, from radio to television, and now to digital, encompassing online and social mediums. What remains the same is that engagement with news is the industry's whole reason for being. Engagement is a particular buzzword now as more news platforms are arising and sometimes disappearing again quicker than ever. With the proliferation of content creators and aggregators across many more platforms, news is now more readily available and accessible than ever before. But this does not directly translate into increased engagement. In fact, youth are less engaged with news than other age groups, and certainly less likely to take action in response to news they hear. As we've heard, many youth are getting no news at all, and many more don't feel empowered to participate beyond just reading or viewing the news. Still, take the flip side of that 20% of youth under 25 being newsless on any given day stat, and notice that 71% of youth are getting some news. Maybe, like me, they grew up in a family of librarians who strongly valued news and information literacy. Maybe they attended schools which emphasized civic engagement. Maybe they're just curious about the world around them. Many of these engaged young news consumers are exploring careers as news producers by studying journalism at colleges and universities around the country. RTDNA has a strong and very quickly growing student membership, and these students are perfectly positioned to engage their newsless peers. Students in student-run media can engage peers on a micro-local level, starting with news about social circles, campus events, and the local community, all the way up to how news events on the global level might be relevant to students. For youth, relevancy seems key. Only 1 in 10 report feeling empowered by news. By starting local and including ways to get involved beyond just what they've read, student journalists can engage their peers, and we've encouraged RTDNA student chapters to do just that on October 7th. Adding action items to news stories is also something professional newsrooms can do to encourage engagement on a deeper level with their news viewers. Already, many stations are learning to broadcast beyond their main platforms and reach a younger audience where they already are with a second screen approach. Newsrooms can also connect further by engaging their audiences with the news process itself. On October 7th, many of the best in the industry will be returning to their newsrooms from our annual Edward R. Murrow Awards show the night before, where we showcase the best work in the industry. RTDNA has already been sharing the story behind the story for some of the award-winning pieces on our website, and we'll be encouraging newsrooms to share their own successes and how they were achieved. As it becomes easier for anyone to be a news producer with only a smartphone or a Twitter account, professional newsrooms have an opportunity to share what makes them unique. In learning to be newsmakers, there's growing interest in seeing how news is made. We see this with the surge in hits on our Code of Ethics and coverage guidelines pages following any high-profile reporting. Giving a behind-the-scenes look at the ethical decision-making and verification processes behind award-winning stories can only make for more engaged news consumers. We're proud of our student and professional members' contributions to journalism, and we're proud to support News Engagement Day so those contributions are heard.
Thank you. You know, as someone who studies the millennial generation, and so this is the generation born in the 1980s, 1990s, millennials are the children of baby boomers. And we are, those of us who are journalism and communication professors, that we're also teaching millennials in our own classroom. Well, one of the things that I realized when I did a national survey and pulled out the millennials for, I'll just show you my book, Millennials News and Social Media is News Engagement, a Thing of the Past. But the reason I wanted to show that to you is because it was in that book, while writing the book, that I had to deal with the fact that part of the problem was that the news media typically does not do a very good job of covering millennials, if millennials are covered at all. And I'm going to give Tom a copy of my book. He doesn't have to pay me. The reason I'm giving it to him, because I quote him quite a bit. In fact, he acknowledges in your own book that the news media really kind of missed an opportunity. I don't know if you remember that, but I have you quoted in there because they could have gotten it right, because this trend that we're seeing, that it's been going on for a while. It didn't happen just last week. I mean, this has been going on for a while, and the trend may very well continue if we don't do anything about it, but we are doing something about it. But the reason I provide that context is that we can't talk about National News Engagement Day without hearing directly from millennials. And I asked both a student, undergraduate student from University of Maryland, and of course we had to go to University of Maryland because our incoming president is from University of Maryland, and Professor Richard Toth, that he actually was able to identify a student who would be perfect for this. But to hear their voices, and a lot of times I will say to my students who are journalism students and say that, well, we should be concerned about, the declining news consumption. And they're saying, well, we're journalism students. We pay attention to the news. We engage with news. And then I say, well, what about your friends? And it's like, oh, yeah. So if you're not in journalism, you very likely are not. And so our representatives on the panel from public relations, communications, and journalism, they'll be able to give us some insight and also talk about what it is that they're doing. So let me call on Jessica Schramm from University of Maryland first.
Yeah, thank you. That was actually a really good point you brought up, and that we are communications and journalism students, so we, of course, are passionate about the news, and we more often follow the news than other students on campus. So we are excited for this National News Engagement Day to share our passion with the rest of the Maryland community. And we'll be holding our premier event, which is going to be led by Professor Pam Grant's event planning class. It's called Maryland Makes History, so it will be on News Engagement Day, October 7th. There will be the Diamondback newspaper and our campus newspaper will be having a survey on millennials and how they engage with the news, and the results will be released on News Engagement Day. And on News Engagement Day, there'll be tables lined across McKeldin Mall, which is the main artery of our campus. Thousands of students pass through every single day. There will be the news articles displayed, the most important and historic news articles of all time, donated graciously by the museum in Washington, D.C. And students who walk through the mall that day will be essentially walking through history on News Engagement Day. There will also be experiential engagement stations featuring UMTV broadcasts and photo opportunities with a cardboard cutout newspaper so they could be the face inside the news. Finally, students will have the opportunity to make news on Maryland's campus as hundreds of students, faculty, and staff come together for a freeze mob photo at 2 p.m. where they will all be reading the Diamondback newspaper. We're also really fortunate to have the news incorporated into a lot of our classroom curriculum. I know when I was learning about PR campaigns in a COM 350 class, which is PR theory, we would frequently discuss current events happening with corporations, whether they be blunders or really great things these corporations were doing to make news and make history themselves, and how we can learn from that and make news as we get older and we join the force when we're working with journalists and we're representing our companies and agencies or in-house and beyond. There will also be a C-SPAN Big Ten bus tour that will be coming on campus on News Engagement Day. The goal is to increase awareness and engage students about upcoming midterm elections, but also connect and inform politically active students and other students who may not be so politically active about C-SPAN programming and resources to connect them with the news so they can make informed decisions and have better media literacy. So we're really excited. I can't wait for October 7th.
Terrific. So, undergraduate speaking, but of course we also have to hear what the graduate students have to say. I first met Letitia Williams in Montreal at our annual AJMC conference. And Letitia is a graduate student at Howard University. And when I met her, it was like, wow, she is, I wonder if I was that impressive when I was a graduate student. I didn't think so. But anyway, I asked her advisor, Dr. Carolyn Stroman, if she might contact Letitia afterwards and invite her to participate and to hear the perspective on National News Engagement Day from the graduate students who are the more involved, a little older and so forth, because we have different, we want to make sure that we include the thinking of graduate students. So Letitia, why don't you kind of give us your take on National News Engagement Day?
Thank you. And for the graduate student perspective, I'm sure we would all be very excited by National News Engagement Day because our lives as graduate students are driven by the news, because the news reveals issues and phenomenon that require research. So for example, based on the recent coverage of ISIS in Iraq and Syria going on right now, I could explore the rhetoric of terrorism. And this study could also examine coverage across multiple screens and platforms, as was referenced earlier. So not only engaging through print or television, but also having that second screen. So you are on a social app on your phone, or you're doing something on the internet. Another example of a possible story could be pulled from a story that was ran in the New York Times last week about Shonda Rhimes, who is the producer for Scandal and Grey's Anatomy, and she has a new show out called How to Get Away with Murder. So in the opening line of the article, the journalist had the quote, "How to get away with being an angry black woman." And so she saw this as being something that wasn't too outrageous, because throughout the rest of the article, she referenced how Shonda Rhimes, through her characters, has challenged that image of the angry black woman. However, there was a lot of public outcry and response to this line. And so based on that article, I could do an analysis of how images of African American women are still prevalent, although there have been an increase in positive images, those issues are still out there. And so in addition to my own research, I also conducted an informal poll of my peers to ask them how they engage with the news. And as the AMG MC poll referenced earlier, a lot of them said that their news engagement is through social media. So through apps on their phone, so they'll set up an alert for their AP app and it will send them when something big happens or whatever the news is for that day. And I asked the same for my students. I teach an undergraduate course for principles of speech at Howard University, and they have the same response, that they're using social media as well. And so I'm very excited about this day because I know that it will encourage those who are not involved in the news to get more active with the news. And at Howard University, our faculty have also explored how they can incorporate things in their classes that day as well. And so at Howard University, we are looking forward to National News Engagement Day.
Terrific. So I don't want to leave out some of the other universities here in the Washington, D.C. area, which is why we have representation from American University. But let me just tell you a little bit about John. I met him this morning face-to-face, but we have been in communication on both email and also on the telephone. And John had sent me this email, trying to find out more information about what people around the Washington, D.C. area were going to be doing for National News Engagement Day. And of course, I responded, well, let's talk on the phone so that I can learn more about what you want to do, and I can help you, go in the direction that you want to go. And plus, I want it to be very, very encouraging. Well, I didn't need to do any of that because he had already figured everything out that he was going to do. And the thing that's really great, and I absolutely agree, you have to meet, particularly young people, you have to meet them where they are. As opposed to saying you will be informed, you will pay attention to the news, which is probably how my own daughter was raised, which is why it took her a while to really, start engaging with news, as her mother had been telling her all these years. But anyway, John says that you need to make it fun, bring in gaming, and so why don't you tell us what your plans are?
Yeah, my codex for teaching is you have to go to where the students are and bring them to where you want them to be. I teach millennials, we all teach millennials, and among the things they do is they play, they compete, and they generally have fun. You don't have to encourage them to have fun. So what we've done is we've established the news games. It's patterned after the Hunger Games. Young people love the books, love the movies. They have a mockingjay within a circle of flame. We have an American eagle, the mascot of American University, holding a pencil within a golden circle. We stole a bunch of stuff legally because it's parody. And we're also patterning it after television game shows and television reality competitions. So the news games started today. They will culminate in a championship on October 7th. And the way it works is this. Faculty members from every discipline across campus will be invited to submit questions related to their disciplines and that has been in the news for the last 9 months. So we have anthropology, women's studies, sports, business, economics, everything you can think of. And they, because it's their area of interest, have been reading and seeing this stuff in the news, and they will submit questions to me. Meanwhile, teams of 2 students in every dorm, in every academic discipline, in fraternities, sororities, from New Jersey, from Pennsylvania, will form 2-person teams. And they will compete in their dorms, in the quad, to develop a championship package of 10 teams that will meet in the new broadcast center at American University for a television game show that will be streamed live to every campus building with a live audience in the studio itself. And the idea is to make them forget their learning, make them forget they're engaging with the news, but they will gobble up news because they need to know the answers. They need to know the questions because they'll win fabulous prizes like mugs and water bottles. And we can't afford very much, but just winning, we think, will be enough to get them engaged in it. There will be live tweets. They'll be able to comment. There's even, we have a new gaming program with a master's degree in game development. And the director of that program at the meeting we had this morning, 2 hours before I left to come here, he said, if you can get the audience engaged, and we decided that the contestants will get a yellow card. And if they come up with a question they can't answer, they'll hold up the yellow card, and the audience members will hold up a green card. And you pick the audience member who's going to answer for you. Just a way of getting more people engaged. It's almost too much fun, I think. But it's going to be an annual event. We're buying a sort of a Stanley Cup trophy where each year a new plaque will go up indicating who won this year. So we expect this to be an annual event.
Wow.
And at some point, we may challenge Howard and Maryland, and we'll see how it develops.
I should have mentioned that the reason that Dr. Watson knows the ethics and the law, because that's also your area of specialty. So when he's saying it's okay if you're using parody to steal a few ideas, he knows exactly what he's talking about. Let's see, I had to go, well, actually, I didn't physically go to New Hampshire, but I imagined New Hampshire when, and presidential candidates already up there, prospective presidential candidates. Has Hillary been up there, by the way? So prospective presidential candidates already, going across the state. It was really quite exciting when I had a chance to talk to Dr. Kristen Nevius, because she has so many plans. She is the executive director of the Marlon Fitzwater Center for Communication at Franklin Pierce University, and she has amazing plans. And so why don't you share those with us, Kristen?
Thank you, Paula. Franklin Pierce University and the Marlon Fitzwater Center are very proud to be part of this conference and National News Engagement Day. We believe that an informed electorate is the key to the health of our nation's democracy, and that we must purposefully work to engage our youth today. New Hampshire takes its role in the first in the nation presidential primary very seriously. I have been on the campaign trail for 3 campaigns now, see many families, children trudging with their parents through fields to see a candidate, squeezing in diners, waiting in the rain or the snow for outside gyms, all to talk to the candidates and to talk to them multiple times. It's a remarkable experience, and many Granite Staters cherish it. Perhaps this is why Governor Maggie Hassan is declaring October 7th National News Engagement Day. I also have the Senate in New Hampshire tweeting, and I had 2 senators tweet their support during the press conference here. They are encouraging the Senate and the House in New Hampshire to participate and encourage their constituents. And we have the largest sitting House in the country, so it's a lot of people. Also, the state's media are all supporting the push, and I also got a tweet from the executive editor of the Manchester Union Leader, which is a very large and historic paper in the state. Broadcast media are participating. New Hampshire Public Television is reaching out through special children's programming. They reach many, many schools in the state, and they connected us with PBS and the Kids News Hour, and we're very excited about that. Since First National News Engagement Day falls during the midterm elections, we thought it only appropriate that we invite candidates to participate in a debate on campus on October 7th. I don't know how much you know about candidates. Their calendars are a little fuzzy, so but we're still tweeting. We will be tweeting. We have created an app, and it should be ready to go, civicsentiment.com, to help the students engage in the media that they are used to, social media. And on a local level, my student media group is working with the extended daycare program, and they will publish the first issue of this year's paper on October 7th, and that's kindergarten through 5th grade. Wow. So we're covering from really young to really old, but it's so exciting to see those little kids, hear them actually. You can hear them do it. Also, more importantly, this is not a one-year effort. National News Engagement Day's mission meshes so well with the mission of the center. This is what we do, and so we plan to build on that and keep it going. But I have to say, I've heard all of these exciting things here. It's going to be hard to keep focused and not adopt all of them or steal them. Yeah.
Or parody them.
Or parody them, yes. Thank you, Paula.
Thank you. One of the things, before we get to your questions and so forth, that I wanted to share with you, which all of this is amazing, and what I'm getting ready to share with you is truly amazing too. That Paul Parsons, who is the dean at Elon University in North Carolina, and some of you may know Elon or know Paul Parsons, that guess who has been on his advisory board? None other than NBC News anchor Brian Williams. And Paul reached out to Brian Williams and told him about National News Engagement Day and asked that he do a video message about National News Engagement Day that we could not only play today but also post on the website for National News Engagement Day. So I'm going to play it right now. I don't know, can we dim the lights? Is that?
As people, we communicate and engage with news in a growing number of ways. The old ways, read, watch, and listen, have been joined and replaced in some cases by words like tweet and like and post and link and share and discuss. These are all words of engagement. Imagine a day when everyone engages with the news. That is the goal of National News Engagement Day. The National Organization of Journalism Teachers, AEJMC, the Association for Education in Journalism and Mass Communication, is working with schools, universities, civic organizations, and the media to make National News Engagement Day a priority. The goal here is to encourage everybody to engage with news, from reading and watching to tweeting and discussing. This is vitally important, especially for young people. The Pew Research Center finds that news isn't even in the lives of almost a third of young adults, that they are essentially growing up news-free. On National News Engagement Day, campuses across our nation will be sponsoring activities to help young people discover the benefits of news, whether giving them something new to talk about and tweet about, or leading them to feel empowered as they learn that news can be helpful in their daily lives and downright vital. And this dedicated day is an opportunity to focus on the values of the First Amendment and on the process of how news comes to us every day. Being informed is empowering, it's enjoyable. I think it's essential for a healthy democracy. While news is important every day, National News Engagement Day offers a special occasion to lift up and celebrate the value of news and the importance of being engaged in this world we live in.
That's fantastic.
Just put it back to this. Okay. I was speechless, when I heard it. It arrived last night about 10 o'clock, and it's just really quite amazing. In fact, all of this is amazing to me. So anyway, why don't we do this? Let's open it up to questions. I do have a mic, so you can talk into the mic and ask your questions. And also, if the panelists want to ask questions of others, that too would be great.
Hi, Charles Self from 227 International. I'm very impressed with the kind of plans I'm hearing here today. And what impresses me most is several of you have mentioned that this isn't going to be the end of it, but you're going to do other things in the future. I wonder overall, how do these activities, and I'm sure there are other activities that we're not hearing about today, how do these activities spread throughout society beyond campuses? I would assume most college students are more interested in news generally than perhaps people outside of college campuses. How does it spread beyond campus, and how does it get sustained beyond this one day?
Why don't you go on and answer, and then I'll say some words.
Well, I'll mention two things. One is in the research that we do at the American Press Institute with the Associated Press and the University of Chicago, we found that young people are more inclined to get into news when something happens, and they're twice as likely as older Americans to then dig deeper into a story when there is an occurrence that attracts their attention. Older Americans are more inclined to sort of have their news consumption be parceled out in regular amounts across the course of each day or whenever they do it, and not necessarily sort of binge into a topic. So those moments when younger people's attention is attracted, those are all moments to get them to think about the way they engage and the choices they make. It's a hook, as it were. The other thing I would say briefly is the word news is confusing. I'm frankly a skeptic of although I spent 16 years at the Pew Research Center doing media research, of the idea that there are a third or more young people whose day is newsless. I think when you ask people about different topics rather than news as an aggregate concept, you will discover that they are engaging with the world around them at much higher rates than we think. So it may be our vocabulary that's limiting our conception of this.
Well, that's interesting because that news list statistics is from the Pew while you were there, but I like it. But it's really kind of consistent with the research that I have done. No question that young people are less engaged, and for reasons. One of the things that I talk about in my book is that I think that this generation might have eventually connected more with news if at the very moment that they came of age, that something else had not come on the scene, as in Facebook. At the very moment that you might expect, with all of the nagging that I did with my own daughter, at the very moment that she may have picked up a newspaper and so forth, then there was something that was getting their attention. But it wasn't just about getting their attention. That Facebook was really embraced young people, embraced the millennial generation. The news media has not. In fact, just very recently, the New York Times apologized for being so negative in its coverage and its stereotyping of millennials. 60 Minutes, if you were ever to go back to look at the 60 Minutes spot that they did, it's been some years ago, it's still talked about. It was so negative toward this generation. But my point being, it is hard to love on something or to really find it appealing if it is so negative toward you. And so I do think that, there is some reason that this generation has not engaged with it as much as it could have, but it's not too late to correct that. You were going to add something.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the point that the results of the survey showed how younger people think that news should be free, and explains why we use a lot of our social channels more than going to the New York Times or outlets that we need to have subscriptions for, because we just don't have the money to pay, especially when you're younger in middle school and high school. Most students don't have jobs, so if they're going to get news, they're going to get it from outlets that they don't need to pay for. So because news isn't free, especially going younger than college and graduate school and professors, what incentive do we have as students to read the news if it's not starting in the classroom? So I really think that news should be incorporated into curriculums on a much younger and much sooner than they have been, as it started with me in college, and I'm grateful for it, and now that I'm in the field of public relations, it's important to me. But when I was younger, I didn't have this sort of exposure, and I think it's important to get high school and middle school and even elementary school students, in some cases, depending on the news topics, involved in incorporating news into their curriculums and exciting students about how they can learn from the news and make news applicable into what they're already learning. As you were saying, how with the news games that you were saying, different majors are interested in different things. So I'm sure there's news that could be relevant to different subjects that kids are learning about on a younger level.
As a matter of fact, in my neighborhood, some of my neighbors learned about the news game, and they said, well, when is it going to come to the high school and middle school? And it will come. We just have to make partnerships with the educators at that level, because everybody likes to play a game, particularly, 12, 13-year-old kids.
Charles, we're really excited about getting the students to allow the push notifications so they'll get news. We know they're all walking around with their cell phones, and we're hoping someone will say, oh, look at this alert I just got, and they'll share that with their friends. So we're really excited about that particular thing that we're doing.
And I'd like to add that a common thread in all of these narratives is the passion behind them, the commitment to the news that everybody who organized all of these things displayed. I think that's what's going to keep it sustained in the future. And Paula has a map of the United States with, blue participation. There are only a couple states, or how many with not?
I think we'd have to work on 8.
8?
Yeah.
But that's
But we have
remarkable.
most of them.
So you see,
And the
there's,
District of Columbia, of course.
there's already a committed body of people out there who pulled through with that tremendous support in just a few months. And Paula was there at the start. So that's what's going to keep it going.
The other thing I should say, I too was worried about sustainability, because you put so much effort into having this one day, but we can't let this day go away. My goodness, we're talking about forever. So I had proposed to the board, the AJMC board, the last board meeting, that we have essentially a virtual center, a center for news excellence and engagement. And so the Center for News Excellence and Engagement, that when we're not focused on, National News Engagement Day, the first Tuesday in October, that we're still doing a lot of other things to keep it in, the minds of AJMC members and beyond, not only to focus on some of the research that's being done and published in the journals and also presented at the conferences and so forth, but to continue to have a conversation. So, we're very well aware of what happens after National News Engagement Day ends, and we have to keep it going. We have to keep involved. And, the truth is, one of the reasons that this is so special to me, because I felt for a long time that I was the only person talking about this. And I'm sure my students, my daughter, others have been, will you please be quiet? And so now we really have a voice to bring all of us together, because I know people feel this way, but you really didn't have an outlet to bring it together. And I think that, what's happening here is that we're saying, yeah, we can do this. Yes, we can have a day to focus on the importance. And, the month before, the first Tuesday in October was selected for a reason. It was selected because it's a month before Election Day. I did learn when I looked it up that it's not always the first Tuesday, because it has to be the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. You probably knew that, Kristen. But anyway, it's always about the first week, the first 8 or 9 days within November. But that is the time, especially if it's a very exciting election year, that young people are going to pay attention to the news more so than any other time. So I see it as an opportunity. So it's an opportunity to get their attention at a time when they might very well pay attention to the news. So there's always some, reason to the madness. Are there other questions? Yes, I know.
I have a question. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay. We know that, of course, national news is something that people can respond to immediately, witness what's going on with ISIS and the bombing in Syria. But how important does the panel think the knowledge of local news for their students are, especially for students who perhaps coming to live in a city that's different from their hometown for the very first time? How important is that?
Yeah, it's very important. In our news quiz, we even have news from the campus newspaper, as well as the local television affiliates from the national networks. Yeah, we realize news is just information you can use to make life better, and it's sometimes right in your front door and sometimes halfway across the continent.
We certainly believe it's critical, because When young people come to Loyola New Orleans, for example, many of them are from out of state, out of the United States. So again, it's a place they're going to live for at least 4 years. And so we want them to start local and really get engaged with the local community, and then we believe it will grow beyond.
And as well at Howard University, a lot of our students are involved in the local news because they're very involved in the local community surrounding our campus, and they're very engaged. And so it is almost a part of our curriculum, per se, for them to become an active citizen and learn what it means so that after they graduate, they can go into another community and be able to do those same things as well.
Just to kind of build on that, you mentioned ISIS in Syria as an example, and we hear more and more that even students and young people that are getting news might not feel that it's relevant or that they can take action. And that's really hard for global issues like that. You know, that's so far away, what can I do about it? And I think that's why it's so important to start with local news, you know, on the campus or community level, because those are issues that they can really get involved in. They can do something, they can go to a student government meeting, they can make a difference, and once they become engaged on that level, they'll see that maybe there is something they can do about broader state, national, and even global issues.
I would just add one point to that. As John said, you know, that it's critical that those of us who care about news work on it where young people are consuming it. You know, you can't change. You can't we're beyond a force feed kind of environment. Local really is a matter of what is relevant to me. Local is no longer simply a concept of geography. It's a concept of interest, particularly because the net allows me to find the things that are. So a big part of what we're talking about is explaining why or how these issues that may be far away are relevant to a given person's life. Because local is not really a zip code anymore. It's a matter of passion and concern.
I want to say one final thing, touching on what Tom said. I think was really profound, when to work on news where young people are consuming it. And I really want to challenge everyone here to do just this, because if we really want students and younger people to become more engaged and form opinions on the news, but then they're not old enough to vote and make these decisions, I really want to challenge everyone to go where these younger people are and take their opinions into consideration after they've become informed, and make sure that you're including them in the population and what really is the best decision for everyone in the city or the town or locally. Because once students do become engaged, and I really hope we do, you don't want them to be feeling left out when they can't take action after they have formed their opinions.
You know, going along with that and what others have said, over the years, besides nag my daughter, I have done a couple of other things to reach out not only to middle school and high school students, but also to older students, college and beyond. That I had created a program in the school district there in Austin called My News at School. And in fact, in the appendix in the book that I describe it in detail, including some of the ideas that I had that the teachers could use in their own classrooms to engage them in the news. Because I too believe that you have to start. If you don't start young, you can still catch up later, but it works a whole lot better if you can catch them young. And having a teacher involve the news into the curriculum, that there's so many benefits to that. So I created a program that essentially would go for 8 weeks. I would pay for the newspaper, and also as a digital component. And essentially every week, over the course of the week, and then the teacher was responsible for providing feedback to me for that week's work. And everything from how journalists write stories, to things about geography and date lines and connecting that. It was really quite wonderful. The other thing that I've been doing, and this is with my daughter, who really has now kind of become a news hound, started a Facebook page. It was her idea to start it. I had a concern about, in a class that I was teaching, not finding stories that were constructive and positive about millennials. So I told my daughter, I said, I really want to find some stories. If I can find some stories, I want to use these as models so the news media would understand that this is how you should be doing it and not this negative other way. And she said, oh, I'll just create a Facebook page. So that was back in 2011. And so you can go to the page. I encourage you to go and like it and have your students too. It's called Millennials and News. And essentially every day we curate stories from the trusted news sources around the country and internationally some, the important stories of today. Now, what we try to do is to combine both what news you should know, that I feel you need to know if you're an informed citizen, also news about millennials and of interest to them. So it's a little bit of mix. So it's like, the broccoli with the dessert. But coming back to your point that my students and students around the country and other classes, journalism classes, are using it in their classroom. So it's being used around the country, and I encourage commenting on these stories. So it's not a grade, but it's essentially completion because it allows us to discuss and also for the students to express their opinion. And I'm not trying to give my opinion, but it's an opportunity to learn what they think about them, whether you're talking about ISIS or whether you're talking about domestic abuse in the NFL, that all of this really can be talked about and they can comment on in very, very thoughtful ways. Another question?
I'm going to build off the sustainability. Gracie Lawson Borders, the dean at the School of Communications at Howard University. And I'm going to build off something that Tom said. Since we know we want to reach young people and millennials where they're at, my research is particularly interested in media organizations because I want to make sure we maintain a free press in the U.S. So what do we do to reach out to them to not only get them engaged in this day, but make them take it upon themselves to find ways to keep us engaged from a sustainability from their perspective.
Tom, you got some ideas on that one?
Maybe I'm beating the same horse over and over, but I think the posture shouldn't be one of disapproval, but understanding. In other words, young people are consuming a lot of media. And they're making choices in how they do it. We need to understand how they behave. We need to understand their use of technology and not be, tisk-tisking or suggesting that they're unwise or that their choices are invalid. They're curious. They're adept. They're skillful in the way they're doing it. They're changing the world. They're creators of media as well as consumers. And they see a future that is very bright and fascinating and more empowering. And we need to sort of embrace that and become a part of that and be relevant to that, not somehow be, look like the disapproving grandparents in the corner.
And I think if we went to media corporations, they want to get that millennial generation, and they're really struggling as to how to get them engaged. And it's interesting, our newspaper at Loyola, the Maroon, the award-winning Maroon, they changed the way they did their front page. And it was interesting, and the young people on campus loved it. But a lot of the older folks, the faculty, were going, ooh, I don't like this. So it's really interesting. They tried something new, and it was exciting, for the young people on campus, and they were reading it. So I think a lot of folks are trying to figure out what can they do, what can media corporations do to really get young folks to want to engage, and I think they're puzzled. They're still looking for those answers.
I think that, and you can take a look at this if you haven't yet, but the Skim
Yeah.
is one of my favorite news aggregates to follow. And I live in a sorority house with 76 girls, and almost all of them get their news from Skim. And it's not because their professors are telling them to, because our professors like us to look at the Diamondback and the Washington Post. But the skim is taking the same news and it's putting it in a language that we use. What's in it for me? They can't sit with us is like the title for why two corporations aren't getting along. You can't sit with us, which is from the Mean Girls. It's a quote from Mean Girls if you don't know. So it's taking the news and it's putting it in a language that we use in a way that we like to get it. It's short, it's simple, it comes right to our phone, it's through email, and it keeps us informed. And I really think that ties back to what Mr. Watson was saying about reaching out to millennials and younger people, meeting them. Don't try to get them to come to you, because I think young people will be more adept and will enjoy reading news and make it a part of their everyday lives voluntarily if it's presented to them in a way that sounds like them and looks like them and talks like them. So.
To build on that, actually, as an undergraduate political science student, not from the world of journalism, I did a research study on young people, my peers at the time, and political satire media. And we looked at, the Jon Stewarts and the SNLs and the Colberts, and that's the demographic of those shows is young people. And what we found is many of them would watch those shows, would be embarrassed that they didn't get the joke because they didn't know enough about the story, and would go find out more. So it's not that the interest isn't there, it's that we're just not saying it in the right language.
And on that note, unless there's another question, I want to thank all of you all, for coming today, and I want to thank you for all of your thoughtful comments and being a part of this, because I know I overuse this word, but I can't help it. This is really amazing. It's amazing what is happening. It is. I can't help it. It is. It's just absolutely incredible. And I just want to thank you not only for being here, but supporting National News Engagement Day and for all that you're doing. And it's just fantastic. And thank you very much. And thank you all for coming too.